Hi, I'm Falada and welcome to my yard. It's my yard. Today we're going to be doing some pit cooking. War is upon us, right? And I've got some special guests here to help us with some recipes that you can use at your campsite. I'd like to take a moment to introduce Her Excellency Ariel de Brabazon. She's going to be helping today. And Ariel, I'm going to leave it to you to introduce our other guests.
Okay. All right, we have two cooks here today, Sigrun Brimblesdotter and Brenna Odunye, also known as Abby and Froggie.
Abby and Froggie. Okay, ladies, why don't you tell us what you're going to be making for us today?
I am going to do a simple potato soup, campfire style for just the basic general, throw it in a pot, let it go, easy to do in camp with very few ingredients.
And I'm going to be following up with a dessert. I'm going to be pears poached in red wine and spices.
Well, that sounds like good eating, don't you think? This is another one of our special guests. This is Kieran, who's come to visit us today and is going to be a official taste tester. And then we also have hiding in the shadows, Thorgrim, who's going to help man our fire while eating his Wendy's chili. Sorry, I was corrected on that. It is a cinnamon roll.
All right, what do you got here? I see you have bacon and you have wine, so some good stuff's about to happen, right?
Yes.
Absolutely. Yes. Share.
So I have from the Scottish and Irish Pub and Hearth cookbook, there is a recipe for a potato and leek soup. Instead of using leeks, I opt for onions just because they're more readily available in the grocery stores around here and a little less expensive, and they hold up better. You don't have to do anything special with them. Simple ingredients. Found it, used it for a few years, then discovered that in Takes 1,000 Eggs or More, you can find references to a glazed soup, which is onions fried in oil, which is kind of how we start this recipe off. So there is a historical tie in there, and I like to use that since we're doing historical camping. Ingredients wise, the list is very simple. We do have milk, we have butter, we have bacon, onion, red potato. I think I said butter, but just in case I didn't, there is butter open over here. So then I have a rosemary and thyme. These are actually from my garden, and I like to use them because I can grind them up in mortar and pestle. I feel like it has a little bit better flavor distribution into the recipe, but you can grab store-bought if that's what's easier for you. And then I have some minced garlic, salt and pepper, and that really is it. It's very simple, very straightforward, one pot wonder.
Wonderful going on here.
Well, I have about 2 pounds of red pears that I'm going to poach in red wine and a few other lovely things, cloves, cinnamon, ginger, and about a half a cup of regular granulated sugar. I found the recipe in Plain Delight in the second edition. It was a lovely Christmas present. I have really enjoyed it. There are a plethora of examples of stewed and poached fruits. Lots of examples. I myself have played around with poached grapes in red wine and some very similar spices. It's the kind of recipe that looks fancy and can make a great presentation, but is very, very easy. It's very user friendly when you're producing a lovely dessert, whether in a home kitchen or in a camp.
Can I ask a couple of questions? Sure. Okay. Froggie, would your recipe be considered a late period because of the potatoes?
I think it would probably have to be, just because potatoes really weren't documented in any of the earlier finds for.
Could any substitutions be made, like turnips or?
Potentially, absolutely. When you're talking about potatoes, a lot of times root vegetables are used in place of those, which would be turnips and carrots and that type of thing. I have not played around with that as a recipe option, but I feel like you probably could.
And Abby, as for your sweetener? Could you use honey? What alternative forms could you use to the
I
brown
have
sugar?
not played around with it myself, but I would absolutely consider honey to be an acceptable substitute. As far as additional sweeteners, I have to do a little more research on it. I'm looking forward to playing around with that though. One way which I did vary from the recipe in the book that I forgot to mention, the modern translation calls for powdered ginger and ground cinnamon. Out of personal preference, I opted for whole spices, partly to make it easier to fish them out, and so it doesn't leave that like gritty ground spice element in the poaching liquid afterwards.
That's a good call. I've made that mistake before, and then you basically run it through a coffee filter.
Yes.
Because you can't get it out of it.
Yes.
Same for me with brewing.
Okay. So this is a red wine vinegar. How does this figure in?
That use about either 1 or 2 tablespoons of that. I have to double check my notes. And it actually is very good at helping balance out the sweetness, not only of the fruit and the wine and the sugar. Because anytime you're doing something super sweet, you want to add something to balance it out, either something tangy, tart, or if you're baking, you add a little bit of salt. And this functions very similarly. And also vinegar itself, the acetic acid, is very good at helping pull the flavor holding compounds, the oils and things out of the seasonings and the spices, especially the dried clove and the dried cinnamon.
Sounds good to me.
So to start off with, chop up the bacon, and we're going to throw it over into the pot and let that start getting cooked down. I usually like to make these pieces bite-sized because they're not going to get any smaller in there, and they are actually what takes the longest to cook of the preset stuff. So we get that chopped up, we'll throw it over there. Then while it is browning and starting to cook, I'm going to chop up these onions and add them to it and let them caramelize.
Okay.
While they are caramelizing, I'll move on and start chopping up the potatoes into chunks and add that to, after I pull the caramelized onion and bacon out and dump that grease, because you really don't want to greasy sit. That'd be gross. It'd be really gross.
True.
But the very, very first part, we're going to start this, and then we're going to add those in and get them caramelized.
That's right. Okay, and Abby, why don't you tell us what your first steps are?
Hi, I'm starting with, to make life a little easier, peeling and then slicing my fresh ginger into slivers rather than grinding them down and making them really hard to pull out again later. Plus, they make a nice little, if you like ginger, a nice little poached ginger side, either for a snack for the chef or for a garnish.
Snacks for the chef are always a good thing. Okay, so, and then you'll,
After which I will parboil the pears. The recipe calls for 5 minutes. That's with a huge grain of salt. That depends on, is it a rapid boil, how ripe are your pears. When I was doing a test recipe, they were a little overripe, and the 5 minutes rendered them very soft and hard to peel. Trying to get the peels off, I was like accidentally gouging out chunks of fruit. So I would recommend erring on the shorter side and cooking by sight rather than by a timer. One of the convenient things I noticed about working with the red pears is that they go from this lovely dusky red to a more of a tannin brown, so you can cook by sight. When they have turned from red to brown, pull them out, set them aside just long enough for them to cool to the touch. And when you do that, go ahead and start your poaching liquid.
okay.
And, yep.
Well, that sounds good, ladies. We'll get y'all started on that.
Okay, what you got there?
Got the chopped bacon ready to go. Gonna add it first into the Dutch oven here so that we can get it started. Takes it a minute, and I want it to have a good head start.
Oh, it's hot.
It is. That's how we want it. Yes, ma'am, please.
Don't use it.
The sizzle of bacon. Sure to call every fighter from the field. Excuse me.
Yeah, bacon.
The trick is to make sure you don't get it too hot because you don't want it to get too burnt. So you can adjust up and down as you're going with the chain. That is a benefit of doing it this way.
Wonderful. We could skip the soup.
Just have the fried bacon.
Yeah.
I'm not going to put the cap back on it right now. Second thought, because I want to be able to watch it pretty well. We'll do that when we're cooking the potatoes down. For now, we're going to leave it open. Just kind of keep an eye on it and stir it up. Let that bacon fat come out.
Okay, so now you've got the bacon in there. You just put the potatoes in?
No, actually what I'll do is I'll add my onions next and let them start to caramelize, and that way the bacon will be getting crispy and the onion will be caramelizing. It infuses that flavor together, lets it meld a little better. Then we'll scoop the good chunkies out, set them to the side, dump that grease, because greasy soup is a little gross. And once that is cleared, I'll add the potatoes in with a little bit of butter, let them start to soften some. We'll add back in the bacon and onion, and then start using the milk and some of our seasoning. I don't use water. This was a good point that I missed earlier when I was talking about ingredients. I didn't include water in that. And the reason why is because a lot of times there are sites that are not going to have access easily to water, and then you're having to tote water for cooking, or can't get to a faucet, or you're not sure about that quality. And you don't really need it for this. You can use the milk to work with that. If for some chance you do get it a little too thick, a little bit of bottled water is a good splash, but you're not having to provide a whole lot of water. This is a thicker soup, so you don't need it.
All right, onion time?
Onion time. I've chopped up these white onions. I'm just gonna dump them straight in here. This bacon is actually not producing as much fat. It is a 4/8, sure, go ahead, dump it on out. We were lucky enough to get in on a butcher who was slaughtering some 4-H pigs from a local 4-H group, and so this is actually local grown, local butchered bacon here, and it doesn't have as much of a fat content as what we buy at the store, so we may not even have to do the straining of the fat to get that out of there. But you can see we're getting a nice browning look there, and it's quite a bit of onion, but I was planning on doing this whole pot full of soup, so we're going to be in good shape, it looks like.
So if it gets a little sticky there, you could put a blob of that butter in.
That's right, exactly.
I'm all about butter.
This is not a cholesterol safe recipe. Not at all.
No.
And now we just kind of let that go and just keep it stoked up and hot enough, and it's on its way, well on its way. Nice. Once it caramelizes down, we'll pull it and then add the potatoes with some butter for sure to get them started, and then we'll add that back in. I don't want these to overcook. Onion has a tendency to get a little too crispy sometimes, and I don't want it to do that.
Yeah,
so.
you have to keep it moving.
Okay, Abby, why don't you tell us what you're working on over here at this point?
Alrighty. Well, we're still waiting on the water to come up to a boil to parboil the pears, which will help greatly facilitate peeling them very gently instead of leaving them whole. So I'm going to start assembling the sauce. This is going to consist of 2 cups of red wine. This is a Pinot Noir, but feel free to use a red wine of your choice. When I was doing a test run, I used like a dark red blend that it turned out very tasty. So that's first cup. And set that there. And cup.
For later.
Again, you have to take care of your chefs.
That's all right.
Next, I'm going to add 1/2 cup of admittedly modern granulated sugar, but again, other sweeteners are possible and available, but this is what I'm going to be sticking with for right now and until further experimentation. And to really spice things up, and I personally love autumn spices. I love ginger and cinnamon, so I'm maybe going to go a little overboard. But again, that's my personal preference. You can adjust this to your personal preference. So I have 2 sticks of whole cinnamon. I have about 1/2 cloves. 1 small sidebar with the cloves. It helps to keep track of how many you put in, so you know how many to fish out later. Otherwise, you might bite into a clove when you're taking a bite of your pears. and freshly peeled, freshly slivered ginger, again, to make it easier to pull out. But also, I think it makes a lovely garnish because I found it picks up the color and the flavor of the poaching liquid, so it's very pretty.
Watch it, you got some beans.
I do. Boop. There we go. And to follow that up also with, I'm going to estimate about a tablespoon of vinegar. It may not be precise, but it'll be pretty darn close. I'm going to do about 2 capfuls for this particular cap.
That's what I grew up learning, using the caps for measurements.
Ma'am.
You know, this is almost a spiced wine recipe.
It is, and when you're done, when I was playing around with it, I tasted the poaching liquid separately, and it was a very mulled, citrusy, lovely spiced wine, and diluted with some nice hot water. It was very pleasant, very warming, and again diluted, so it's not terribly alcoholic, but it was very enjoyable.
Well, I'm sure a lot of the alcohol comes out of it anyway.
More's the pity.
I was wondering if maybe you couldn't have, I mean, do you use the juice, your poaching liquid as a sauce afterwards?
Yes, ma'am, because it actually, the liquid reduces as you're cooking it. I forgot to mention that you're actually simmering it, not just throwing it all in there and hoping. Although it does look lovely and smell lovely now.
It does.
You want to dissolve all of the sugar while you're working, and you want to pull as much flavor out of your spices and seasonings as you can, and either fish them out or not as you choose. And then you're also, once the pears have been parboiled enough to where you can very easily just kind of scrape off the peel with your knife, then be sure to remove like the stem line and the core. You can place them back in either halved forms or in quartered, and you cook them the rest of the way in the poaching liquid.
Oh, that sounds great. Let's see how your water's doing. It's getting there. We had boiling water, but it kind of died down, so. Okay, well,
We'll get this out of the way.
I will go get that out of the way, and we'll come back to this in a moment. So you're just dissolving the sugar now, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. It's starting to smell pretty good. Here we have Mistress Ariel taking pictures.
Yes. Falada taking pictures of me.
Pictures!
There you go.
Okay, while Abby's been working on her pears, Froggie's been diligently working on her stew. And you're at what point now, Froggie?
Well, I'm just keeping an eye on these onions. I don't want them to get too done. What you want is that nice golden caramel. We're starting to get there, so it won't be long before I need to scoop those out. In the process of waiting on that, I have also begun chopping up my potatoes over here.
Okay, so here we have chopped potatoes.
Chopped taters.
Okay.
Taters.
And how many potatoes?
Well, what I went with was a 3-pound bag of red potatoes because they, in my opinion and experience, I like the consistency and the texture of them, and they tend to cook down nicely, especially in soups and stews. Okay. So that's how I went with those. And what I'm doing is cutting them into small enough chunks that they should cook down fairly quickly. That way you can reduce some of your cooking time.
Sounds good. And here we have a little bit of a close-up of Abby's pears. Pretty pears, parboiling, and her wine sauce warming up. Does the wine need to come to a boil, or?
It depends on how much of the alcohol you want to remove. Like if you are serving it to, say, a family function where you know there are going to be children or people who, for whatever reason, can't have alcohol, choose to avoid alcohol, boil it and boil it. But this is one of those recipes where you can customize it.
Okay, let me ask you a question. Another one of them questions.
Looking forward to it.
If you've got somebody who, for whatever reason, is avoiding alcohol, is there anything you can substitute for the wine?
I imagine that you can substitute, and again, I have not tested this. I would expect that you can substitute like a cranberry apple fruit fruit juice blend, like a fruit punch kind of a thing. And perhaps add a little more of the red wine vinegar to help cut the extreme sweetness. Either that, or perhaps add less of the granulated sugar to offset the already added sugar that's in the juice. So again, I haven't tested it, but that substitution would make sense to me.
Is it tater time?
It is tater time.
Tater time?
Tater time.
Tater time!
Taters, precious taters. So as you can see, we have a nice golden consistency here throughout all that. We're gonna, because we didn't have the fat content, I don't have to scrape and reduce and all that good junk. So we're just gonna dump these in there and keep them stirring so they don't stick. I'll add my other stick of butter in here and start adding the lovely herbs, the thyme and the rosemary. And let's get us started. Ready to... See, I had a pot holder this time. I didn't have that last time, so I was using a steak. Taters and steaks, man. There we go. We're just gonna let that keep right on cooking and cook those taters down. We'll be good to go here shortly.
Is there enough fluid in there for those potatoes to cook in?
We're gonna start adding a little bit of milk. We'll do the butter, and then we'll add little bits of milk into it.
All right, what's next?
Okay, next we're gonna add in our spices. So what I have is the minced garlic, which that's a couple of tablespoons there, and about a tablespoon of the thyme, which I'm going to go on and crunch up really good with the mortar and pestle so that it will release some of those oils and flavors. It's a little older, so it is a tiny bit drier than what you're gonna find in the grocery store or when you've just fresh dried it. However, kind of bring it down into a little bit of a grind here. They're not quite as big as they were. Mortar and pestle grinding is it is taxing, but you can get a good mush on it here. I'm gonna throw that off and add in about a tablespoon also of the rosemary that I dried out of my garden. That's a little more than that. And get it crunched up good. Make it nice and pretty. There it is, it's whole, where it was stripped off with the stalks. I'm gonna bring it down. You can feel when you're getting a good grind going, you'll feel and you can kind of hear that ceramic hit ceramic. For those who are not familiar and want to bail off into the world of a mortar and pestle, I like it. Plus, you can start smelling that the rosemary starts to release that fragrance, and that's what you want for throwing into that soup.
Nice. So you grew it yourself?
I did.
So if someone was growing rosemary, it's like, well, how do I dry it? How long? Where do I dry it? What is the process?
What I did, which I had not done this before, this was my COVID garden. We did a lot of those. A lot of us did those. But what I did was planted the plants. I just went to Home Depot and grabbed, off the rack. Got them planted. We had some raised beds that my husband did for me. Beautiful, made out of cedar. Put the rosemary in the very center. I did squares so it tiered down, and made sure it had good drainage. Rosemary likes to have good drainage, doesn't like its feet wet. And when they were getting kind of thick and leggy, I would snip my outside edges to kind of reshape it. Rosemary makes great topiaries, so when you see those, a lot of times if they've got that great smell, it is the rosemary. But you can pull those outside edges off. Then you just take and if you want to use it fresh, what I do is grab the edge and then just run my fingers down to pull all those little leaves off.
Strip the leaves off.
And that's how I do it when I'm going to use it fresh. If I'm drying it, what I do is just tie those sticks of the rosemary up and hang them somewhere around the house because I love the smell. In the kitchen is a great place, but you can hang them pretty much anywhere that you can use them as decoration for the moment. Let them dry real well, and then you can strip them off dried and store them.
Nice.
And that's the whole process. And then once you've got all this together, we're going to take it over and put it in the pot, and it's ready for seasoning.
All right, it's time.
It is.
No pun intended.
Thyme and rosemary and garlic, and we're
There
going
you
to throw
go.
that off in here.
You can't have too much garlic.
I don't think so either. Don't think so. That one clove business is for the birds.
Yeah.
You give them the
That's
one
for
clove.
amateurs.
You give them the one clove, and then you use the rest for yourself.
There you go.
Set that off in here and give it a good swirl. We want to get that mixed in real well. And we may, as it goes along here, add a little bit more of that garlic in. Like you said, kind of can't go wrong with garlic.
So at what point does the liquid go in?
Well, fixing to do that here just momentarily. That is the very next step.
So once you've got it good and mixed.
Yep. Then we're going to start adding in some milk and just keep it at a simmer. So I'm not stoking that fire up more because I don't want it to get too hot. You'll start scorching the butter and the milk.
Got going here.
Well, we have been very gently cooking the pears just in plain water, just enough to achieve that color change. And if you see, it's gone from this lovely dusky red to, they look like they're a completely different type of pear. They're more of a greenish, brownish. That tells us that they should be ready. So in a moment, I'm going to very carefully remove them, put them on a cutting board, and once they're cool enough to handle safely, I'm going to begin by peeling the skins off and halving and removing the cores of each of them. And then once I have everything smelling just divine in the sauce pot here, I'm going to very carefully, without splashing, because this is hot, add the pears to the poaching liquid and continue the cooking process.
Very good.
So yeah, they've gone from
Kind of like
being a cranberry color red to more of a brown now. So, okay. How can you tell how done they are?
Well, they're not cooked yet. The purpose of the parboiling step is to make it easier to remove the peels. The actual cooking happens in the poaching liquid once that liquid is ready. The wine and vinegar and sugar and spice blend. That's where the majority of the actual cooking takes place.
Put that back. How is your wine concoction going?
Let's check on that. Oh, that's
Ooh.
shaping up nicely.
It smells wonderful.
The sugar is nice and dissolved. The cinnamon sticks are starting to soften just a little bit, as happens when you put dry spices in a liquid and add heat. The ginger is starting to, it was kind of a pale gold, now it's more of a pinky color.
So it's absorbing that
And
liquid.
and there's a nice flavor exchange happening. It's not just being picked up by the ginger, flavor is also coming out into our lovely poaching liquid.
Now, didn't you say that you had done something similar to this with grapes?
I did, and I wish I could say it was a completely historically accurate recipe. Credit where it's due to Iron Chef America. Search for the legend or whatever it's called on Netflix. They did a medieval inspired episode, and the recipe is equal parts red wine, and I've experimented with a variety of different wines, as long as it is a red that is to your taste, and equal parts red wine and orange juice and some cinnamon. Again, I prefer a cinnamon stick. It's easier to scoop out and it doesn't leave like a gritty texture on your fruit. Let that simmer until it smells like the flavors have all really melded. And a small bunch at a time, not the whole bag, add it into the pan in a single layer. And much like when you're looking for the color change in the pear peels, you're going to be cooking by sight and a little bit by smell with the grapes. The red seedless grapes is what I've been using so far, just the red and the red. And you're looking for it to turn a little more orangey opaque as far as the grapes, and flip them if you need to, if it's a larger bunch, but you want to cook them just until you see the color change. If you cook them longer than that, they will taste fine, but they will be so soft that they will mush very easily. So transferring them onto a plate, mush fruit isn't very presentable. It tastes fine, but it isn't very pretty if you're doing it for a nice meal.
Sounds good. And it actually, I mean, Ariel, do you think that, I think that sounds like a period recipe personally. I can't see anything in it that would be.
Like the orange juice?
Sure, they had orange juice.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's bitter oranges rather than sweet oranges.
So you can compensate with like
You can
sweetener of
compensate.
your choice.
Exactly. You just adjust it, and a lot of as I understand it, not having had a bitter orange that I'm aware of, sometimes a recipe will substitute a little lemon juice for the orange to cut the sweet, which I've done. You see that in Scoppy's recipes.
That's
Going
true.
on here.
Well, what we've got is these beautifully parboiled pears. They are starting to soften, but they're not fully cooked, which is actually what you want. As I may have mentioned in an earlier visit, you don't want them so cooked and so soft that they are hard to handle. You want to be able to hold them and peel them. And it will no doubt take a few minutes for them to cool down long enough or enough to be handled safely. You're going to peel them and halve them, and as I have done with one already just for demonstration purposes, you're also going to remove the stem line, and you're going to core the pear. You're going to remove the core and the seeds. You can do this a couple of different ways. If you're confident in your knife skills, you can use a small paring knife. If you're worried about the fruit being a little slippery, you can get a metal measuring spoon, like a quarter teaspoon measure, something like that. And that sharp metal edge will help get a nice round cavity in your pears. So peel them, core them, get all the gunky bits like the seeds that you are not going to want to eat. And then once I have done these, I'm going to return them to the poaching liquid and finish the cooking process.
Okay, so you keep them in halves. You don't slice them or anything.
It's a dealer's choice. I quartered them the last time, and what I learned is they're smaller, they cook faster, they overcook faster, and they get very soft and hard to handle, and it's just not as pretty. If you're watching it like a hawk, you can sliver it and slice it and do whatever your heart's desire chooses to do. I'm going to keep it simple, and I'm just going to have it just for structural integrity's sake so that it's easier to handle. It just looks a little prettier.
That makes sense. Pears can go to mush very quickly.
Yes. Especially since on my test run for this recipe, they were perhaps a little overripe, so they turned to mush very quickly. But again, if you are confident in your knife skills, feel free to peel with the knife and core with the knife and everything, but you can adjust your approach as needed. Boop.
Well, I'd say you have very good knife skills. I would have already made a sacrifice to the kitchen gods at this point.
But yeah, it is a little slippery, so I am trying to go a little slower and holding it to have good control rather than trying to fiddle with it on the cutting board.
Tell you what, I'll take that, and you can tell me what you're doing now.
Okay. So what we have is we have accomplished that nice golden color. Our potatoes are starting to are good and soft, they're at a good mushing stage. So what I'm gonna do is try not to fall in the fire while I remove that, and set it just up here on the side in a nice stable spot. We're gonna drop that down. Check the bottom real good because it's been sitting for a minute. And I've got short little arms like a T-Rex, so it's hard to get to the bottom sometimes. I want to give it a quick check, and as you can see, it's this lovely
looks
golden
good.
color. And for those of you who don't have smell-o-vision, it smells delightful. The rosemary, the garlic, it's all melded in there nicely. We threw in a little bit of salt and pepper. Of course, you can always salt and pepper to taste after the fact. But what we're at now, you see there's just a smidge of liquid down in the sides, but we're gonna add that milk to give it that creamy texture. So
Now, is that butter, or is that exuded from the potatoes?
I
or-
added in, at the last stage, we were a little dry.
Okay.
And I didn't want it to stick, and I needed these to kind of simmer some so that they would cook down. So we stoked just a tiny bit of fire, and then I added about 1.5 cups, 2 cups of water, and let that simmer so that these would go on and cook.
That sounds good.
And they have done their job and done it well. So I'm gonna go grab that milk real quick and be right back.
Alrighty. We'll pop over here and look at these coals. This is a raised cooktop. Just making sure she's got a good amount of heat going over here still. We had a issue a moment ago before with the coals dying out quicker than we expected. But I think we're on track with that now. Okay, back to the milk.
All right, so I've got about I have a 3/4 cup measuring cup. I'm gonna start with 3/4 of a cup. Top it just a little bit. And just drop that in. Set this back out of my way. I'm gonna grab something with a little more body to it. Set this spatula out of the way. And see what we're getting here texture-wise.
So you do go ahead and mush them.
Yes. Yep. Give it some smushing here. And there will be chunks. It'll be chunky, but I want it to have more of a mushed texture.
Do you ever use a potato masher on this? Or?
I do sometimes, if I remember to bring it. If not, the back of a flat spoon works, or of a solid spoon, I mean, rather. Works great.
And you'll return that to the heat in a minute?
I'm not going to put it directly on. What I'm going to do is kind of set it in the coals to the side a little bit. We just want it to stay warm. We don't want it to get too hot. Or alternatively, what we can do is shorten the chain so that it raises it up, because now that we have that milk in there, we don't want that to scorch.
Gotcha. Okay. Where are we at, Miss Abby?
We have just finished peeling and coring and everything else we needed to do to the pear halves, and I'm very carefully placing them in the poaching liquid. For starters, I'm placing them cut side down, just so they're a little less slippery putting them into the pot. It's just for safety. I'm going to slide these in cut side down, and when I get them in, I'm going to
Baste them.
baste. Also, I need to check the heat under the pan, but this
Is
is
that pan gonna be big enough?
we will make it work.
Okay.
I think it'll be fine. We'll just have to Tetris them in there. It'll be fine.
Maybe big to the edge and
Yeah.
butts to the edge and points to the center.
Could be. And you know what? I think we'll be fine.
Okay, sounds good. And that is just kind of simmering a little bit, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
That's good. You pulled that lid off and got hit with that cinnamon and that clove, and it was just magnificent. That looks like just enough room, doesn't it?
I think you're right.
Oh my gosh. You couldn't have planned that better if you tried.
Right, and that ginger has turned out lovely and purple.
You have a piece of it to show.
Yes.
Ooh, how pretty is that?
So it's a snack for the chef, but also can be pulled out and arranged as a garnish.
Or even
And simmer and baste and let it poach.
Okay, now do you leave the lid off while you're doing this to cook down, or do you start with it on and...
Previous iterations of this recipe have been done indoors, so it was less of an issue, but if we're cooking outside and it is starting to get a little cool, I think I will opt to go ahead and put the lid back on to conserve some heat.
Now you were explaining, Froggy, why this is a a dark potato soup as opposed to the white potato soups we normally are used to?
Yeah, we have a couple of reasons for that. One is that we did the bacon and onion first and let it saute together, and that does create a dark colored, almost roux like you would use for a gumbo, but it darkens that to start with. Plus, we're also cooking in cast iron. Cast iron does darken your food as you're cooking along. Onions and potatoes will absorb that iron. That's why people who cook in cast iron probably not going to be as anemic as other folks, because you're going to get that iron off in there. But it makes it a little darker, so it gives it that golden look, which is what we were really after. You've got a nice rich looking soup to go for a cold night.
Okay, Abby, how are we doing there?
We are doing great. I'm about to very gently flip the last pear into the poaching liquid, which is at a nice simmer. It smells amazing. And the cooked side of the pears, it's almost taken up the original color of the peels before they were put in the water to cook. Oh, I wish you could smell this.
It smells great. I'm going to get a close-up of this because the color is so pretty on these. That's just amazing. Now, if you were serving these, I know camp serving is a little different than like formal dinner. How would you serve these? What would you serve with them?
That would depend on a couple of different things. If somebody had just run to the Walmart down the street and got like a little tub of vanilla ice cream to be eaten immediately, and you didn't have to worry about keeping it at freezing temperatures because they're just going to be eaten immediately, this would be amazing with a scoop of cold vanilla ice cream. If Walmart and vanilla ice cream is not necessarily an option, in a bowl by itself or on top of maybe some oatmeal, something that's not already, nothing with savory elements, not like cheesy grits or anything like that, but maybe nestled on like a nice little bed of something like oatmeal that would lend itself well to like fruit additives.
I could see this served with one of Ariel's Brazil cookies.
Or sliced instead of halved and maybe laid across a slice of cake.
Sure. Something with a nice vanilla overtone to it.
Yes.
Well, they smell wonderful and they're just beautiful. Okay, what were you saying about the syrup?
We've talked about things to pair it with, but the syrup itself is actually lovely and definitely is cooking down quite a bit. It's going to be much thicker, much more of a syrup rather than just a flavored, much less viscous liquid. So we have this lovely jewel tone, beautiful thing to drizzle over it. You can cook it down as much or as little as you want, depending on how thick you want it. It's nice.
It's very beautiful. As we wait for the steam to die down in front of Abby, here we have our wonderful cooks and their creations, their potato bacon soup, and their pears in wine sauce, and it smells absolutely wonderful. And I would think anybody would be proud to be able to serve this to their encampment. So thank you all for doing this, and yeah. Anything else you'd like to add? Want to say hi to anybody? Hi, Mom. Anything?
Be safe when you're cooking and have some great food.
Yeah.
Okay.
Food is love, man. Food is love.
Food is love. All right. Thank you, ladies, so much.